every good class should begin with l'chaim. L'chaim, everybody. So I thought that first of all, we'd give an overview of last week's class, but it's also important to know and recognize the moment that we're in. Tonight, according to the Jewish calendar anyways, is the 14th of Iyar, which is considered what's called Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach. The second Pesach is an opportunity to repair, reflect, heal, whatever you may have missed the first Pesach. So if you do a little fun tonight, for a little homework, you can Wikipedia, you can Google, go to Chabad.org. What is second Pesach? Briefly means there were certain Jews that were not able to partake in the first Passover. So they asked Hashem, they asked Moses, they said, can we go ahead and have another Passover? And sure enough, God says, because you asked, because you desired, I will grant it to you. Now, there's one important point, and we'll move into the class that I want to share with you about Pesach Sheni. The most important point is that they desired. The fact that they wanted something and they felt left out, that was enough to go ahead and motivate and inspire. So anytime we're feeling maybe spiritually devoid, all we really need to do is ultimately scream Lama Nigara. That is the Hebrew words for why should we be left out. If you're feeling left out and it bothers you that you're feeling left out, then certainly your prayers will be answered. And I think this is very appropriate for the moment that we're in, where so many of us are feeling left out for one reason or another. But don't be complacent and say, well, everyone's feeling left out, so it's okay. No, it should bother you that you're feeling left out, and you should do whatever you can to not feel left out, and you can start by making others not feel left out. So that's just a overarching little Torah for the moment that we're in. And now I want to give a little bit of a recap of last week for those who may not have been here last week, for those who have been here but need a little bit of recap. Last week we spoke about the very, very beginning of the process of what it's all about in terms of love and relationships. Bashert, can it be? How do we find someone? And we spoke about the fact that Adam and Eve were created for one person, to be divided, only to look for each other again, this whole concept. And so we broke it down into a two-step process, which the rabbis were in their geniuses. One was the engagement, one was the marriage. The engagement meant that you were not allowed to be with anybody else, but you weren't about to be with your spouse either. So it was like the worst of both worlds. And the marriage is all of a sudden you could be with your spouse. And we asked why. And we said because we had to establish the reality of oneness, to reflect, to let that sink in, that this is the other part of your one self. And once you have this notion and it's really embedded in you, the reality of your oneness, then you can express the oneness. And I guess we could use this to parlay into our next class. There's something that's very, very difficult and confusing when we talk about sexuality. Everyone, if you're healthy, craves it. And ultimately, it's quite confusing from the sexual revolution, the 60s, whatever you want to call that, to even today, the availability of it, the porn industry, the whole notion of it has been completely, publicized in a way where it maybe diminishes sanctity, its intimacy. And so while the expression of sexuality has possibly never been stronger or more vain, but the reality, the realness of what sexuality can be and should be has been lost to a large degree. And we could just take a look at, ourselves, our statistics around us, marriage, you name it, it's problematic. So this class is more, while last week covered the bashartness, now we're going to kind of, go into the bedroom, not mine or yours, but in Judaism, what does Judaism have to say about the bedroom and how is that supposed to be? Because, and I'm going to give an overarching of the whole class I decided to do this week, and then we'll go into some of the text. Because when you think about sexuality, at least in terms of most religions, it's a no-no, it's a negative. Whether you're a monk that's, sworn to celibacy, or whether you're a priest. And, I don't like to talk about my own, but even in the Jewish and the more traditional, where it's, I would say, unhealthy, we see that there's problems. We see that there becomes big, big problems. But in the perfect setting, especially within Judaism, we know that there's supposed to be sexuality. It's supposed to be revered. It's supposed to be special. It's an obligation on the husband to provide the necessities for the wife. As a rabbi that's done quite a few weddings, I talk to chassan and kalas. My wife teaches the kalas. I teach the chatan. There's an obligation upon the man to please the woman. So these are sources that we're going to get into here in our sources in our text. But I just wanted to give an overarching view that in Judaism, sexuality is not a bad thing. It's possibly the greatest thing. And we'll talk about that, and I'll bring that out in terms of our physical experience here in this world. Before I get to that, I want to also give you a general teaching rooted in Hasidism, obviously, and Kabbalah, but it plays itself out in every aspect of life. So everything physical has to have a spiritual counterpart by definition. Nothing physical can exist in this world without some sort of spiritual soul to it. Because to say something exists without a spiritual component to it is to say that something exists outside of godliness. Now, we know that's impossible. Nothing can exist outside of him. So everything that we see, everything that we experience, everything that is around us has to have some sort of godly component. Even if it's negative, it still has, a minutia that's driving it to exist. It could be to test us. It could be for other reasons. But we don't, by definition, think that there's another force outside of godliness. Okay, let's bring that home a little bit. What does that mean? Like, let's talk language. Let's talk English, 2020 here. What it means is that every moment of your life and everything that you can see or not see, you experience, you have the opportunity to express and find the very godliness in it. So, for example, if you can see it right now, I have a coffee. I usually have my 5th coffee at 8 p.m. It's my lifestyle. I apologize beforehand. L'chaim. In the coffee, at least in this one, there's no sugar, there's no milk. I like it straight. Coffee comes from coffee beans. Beans that are sprouted, that are cured, that were buried in Guatemala or wherever they come from. It happens, not by accident. There's a process. If we have a consciousness, then we can make a blessing on the coffee, shahakol niyeh b'dvaro, and we elevate the coffee. We've now extracted and expressed what would be the godly potential even in the coffee. How much more so by saying hi to your neighbor? How much more so by giving charity? Money that you worked hard, that you earned for, you're now going to give for an important cause, whatever that may be. So every opportunity in life really represents or presents to us an opportunity to go ahead and extract and elevate the spiritual experience in it. You ever notice when you make a bracha, even if for those that are not that plugged in, most people know this from Hebrew school or wherever, the first 6, 7 words of every bracha are the same. Asher kidishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. What does it mean, Asher kidishanu? Kiddushin. It's the same as marriage. So we talk about Kiddush and marriage, the same thing. What does it mean to be holy? When we say a blessing on any object, any physical experience, what we're really doing is we are now marrying God again, even in a minute way. It's becoming a certain unity between the physical and the spiritual because we've managed to expose it. I could spend a lot more time on this concept, but I want to go into more of the meat and potatoes that we're going to here to talk about, but it's important to get an overarching idea. So when you think about what I just said, and the Torah mandates, the first mitzvah is to have children, puruvru, and to be intimate with our wives, and to provide, the relationship and the intimacy that we should have in any healthy relationship. So to think that that would be devoid of the soul experience is, of course, missing the greatest point. And since I think most of us can agree that if we do it in a healthy fashion with our significant other in the setting of a marriage, then certainly physically that could be and should be the most physical experience you can enjoy in this physical world. I mean, I've had some amazing corned beef sandwiches in New York. That's definitely up there. But in terms of our own physical indulgence or appreciation that the world has to offer, to be intimate with your soul partner on the physical level, we're not going to get the spiritual, should be a tremendous, tremendous experience. So if that's the case, then everything has to be commensurate to each other. So the spiritual experience should be right there just as much. And if, God forbid, we have a physical experience relationship devoid of the spiritual counterpart in any aspect of our life, if we eat the apple dismissively without thinking or making a blessing, which, don't tell anybody, I think I may have, messed up on that once or twice, then we miss that opportunity. No one's going to hell, relax, it's not about that. But when we think about it, even if you're in a rush and you stop and you make a blessing even though you're busy. So you've now plugged in, now you've zoned in on a higher, deeper experience. So same thing with sexuality. If you go ahead and approach it with just a self-indulgent without any sort of ability to see beyond your own personal gratification, then you're missing a great opportunity. And not only that, what happens, at least with sexuality, as we know and we've seen, it can become an obsession, a self-gratifying obsession. We know that there's addiction that comes along with it on a very, very high level. And sometimes that becomes very ugly. You know, I've always wondered, especially when I was younger, how is it that such great, great people, you know, I'm not talking about just Jewish people, like, you know, governors, presidents, you name them. Now I guess politicians, you know, that's not a good example. But back in the day when maybe even 25, 30 years ago, we had a little bit more than it has today, how did such great people fall from grace? You know, so I don't want to get specific because, you know, if I say a name and even government of 20 years ago, it could be your uncle, friend, and you know, how can it be for one, you know, someone's going outside of their own home for a little bit of satisfaction, immediately they break a home, the kids see it. How does that happen? Because let's not kid ourselves. It's important to know as we start this class, sexuality is one of the most powerful forces that God gave to us. And just as every physical experience has a spiritual, for every body there has to be a soul. So therefore in sexuality also, because it's so powerful physically and emotionally, therefore it also carries within it the potential for the greatest experience spiritually as well. And I'll add by one more idea and then we'll go into some of the sources.
I love the sources.
Should I be sharing the source sheet? Is that what I'm getting here? Do you guys have it? You're good? Okay. So the one last idea is that, as we mentioned from last week's class, because we started as one unit, man, woman is one unit, and then God divides us, because as we've now come to appreciate, God has a very interesting sense of humor, and he divides us only so that we can find the world to see if we can once again be united again. The greatest unity we have is when we're one with our partner, like we were before we came down to this world. When does that happen? At the highest level, during intimacy. So we see that this urge of sexuality is actually in many, many aspects driven by spirituality, and we just have to harness it and make sure that we're getting it the right way. So Judaism does not frown from it. It's, you know, maybe there's certain timelines, but we're not worried about this conversation. We talk about the conversation. It's throughout our Bible, and I bring it to you here tonight from the very, very sources based and rooted in Torah itself. Okay? So here we go, L'chaim, everybody. Another successful class. Let's elevate. I find it interesting that I don't want to judge, but I see that there's a lot more women in this class than men in this class. When the truth of the matter is, maybe we should be the other way around. So, but you'll tell your boyfriends, I'm recording this class, so we'll share it to them. I'm not talking about the holy chevra like Reben and David, etc. Okay, here we go. Text number 1. Anybody want to read?
No,
it's English. Okay, I'll read. In a religious setting, the obstacle the body imposes on one's mind would be conceptualized as a barrier between the individual and God. Most religious settings. Therefore, to become closer to God means to become alienated from one's body and bodily functions, first and foremost from the sexual drive. As a result, the absence of such as regarded by the intellectual and emotional stance, leading to a more perfect human state and closeness to God. When we think about, as I mentioned in the beginning class, for the most part, we see that, you know, the more you can refrain from animalistic behavior, material behavior, so the more you're putting yourself in a position for spiritual. That's how most people look at it. Even though in many religions there are people that are allowed to have sex, we could say it's only because they're amateurs spiritually. In other words, you're either one or the other. You're either away from the material, physical, worldly experience or not. And we know very much that when it comes to Judaism, it's really not, we frown on that. For example, in many, many cases throughout, especially in Genesis as well as Exodus, we have individuals that try to worship asceticism, which means they wanted to move themselves away from the physical world. We have the spies that didn't want to go into Israel because they didn't want to work the land. They were happy with the manna from heaven, and they were happy from just being in the desert protected by the clouds of glory. And they didn't want to go in. Why? Because they wanted that spiritual experience, but that's not the end game. The end game is to have, they didn't want the physical experience of plowing the land and getting into the land of milk and honey. Now we see the sons of Aaron, when we talk about the Torah, they also wanted to go to God.
Excuse me, Rabbi, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can we just ask that everyone mute their mics? It's a little bit hard to hear you.
Okay, I think I may be able to do that. Let's see if I can figure that out.
I know that people are commenting on the chat box, but just thought I'd make it easier for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't always see the chat box, but I will do right now. Hang on a second. Let's see what's going on here. That's not it. Participants. Here we go. Mute all. Okay. Everybody's been muted. Remind me, like wave heavily if I ask to call on somebody. Hang on a second. There we go. Okay. So we see that the sons of Aaron also, they went into a very spiritual retreat, but they expired. And they were punished for that. The question is why, if they were just trying to connect to godliness? Because the goal in Judaism, very, very different. It's not about 70 virgins for us. It's not about heaven and hell. It's not about pie in the sky. It's about bringing godliness into this physical world. The entire premise of Judaism was God created a world that he hid himself in, and our job is to express it. Is to express the godliness everywhere. So that's an overarching idea, and certainly that's most prevalent and most dominant and perhaps most important when it comes to intimacy and sexuality. So, therefore, while other religions may have refrained from sexuality, etc., Judaism does not. I want to add one more thing, which I think is very appropriate to the moment that we're in Corona, COVID-19, bizarro world that we all exist in. I still need to pinch myself when I go outside and I see everybody's wearing these masks. I'm like, did I wake up in a sci-fi flick? What happened here? But here we are, and it is real. So, as a religious Jew, the temple, the shul, the reading of the Torah, as a rabbi, I get calls for, we have a bris going to be this Tuesday, another one on the way. I have a friend whose mother is ill in ICU for a week. She's probably not going to make it. What do we do for funerals? None of our ritual movements are quite the same. Certainly when we talk about the shul, the synagogue. And so what's important to remember is, while that is an integral part and we'll be back there, ultimately the shul was not the end game. The shul was there to make sure that when you go home, you're an elevated person. The goal is not how many hours we spend in shul. The goal is that the rest of the time, we have the shul elevating and reverberating in our system and in our experience. So again, once again, we see the spiritual and the physical, a very different approach in Judaism from other religions. Text number 2. It says, the greatest book called Shir HaShirim by King Solomon himself, out of 24 books, and we talk about this book being one of the greatest. So it says this is from Song of Songs. The Song of Songs by Solomon, may he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. This is how the opening of Shir HaShirim, one of we have 24 books of the 5 books of Moses and the prophets and the writings, and this is considered to be, this is the Holy of Holies. This is referring to, and Rabbi Akiva understood this poem as an allegory between God and the Jewish people. There were people at the time said, hey, what's King Solomon doing? He's off the rails over here. He's talking about kissing and this and that. I said, no. This is an analogy between God and the Jewish people. In a few weeks from now, we'll have the giving of the Torah, and at that time, we have this marriage between us, and God would be, as it were, the groom, and we are the bride, and we go into this marriage ceremony, this partnership, to make this world a better place, right? Chosen people. If you don't believe me, go ask 1.4 billion Christians, 1.4 billion Muslims. They'll tell you the Jews are the chosen people of the book. And so in that moment of that marriage, we represent the kala, the bride, and God would be the groom. So we see that this entire experience that King Solomon is talking about in terms of intimacy, he's using almost the sexual images between a man and woman describing. So it's also important to appreciate that Judaism should be a relationship. It shouldn't just be something that's routinized. I keep kosher, I don't keep kosher, I keep Sabbath, I don't keep Sabbath, I used to, it got hard, I stopped, I'll begin. Those are the challenges of Judaism. Those are the difficulties. But if it's a relationship, think about a husband and wife, right? No one walks around hopefully saying, I do listen to her, sometimes I don't, I feel like it, I'm into it, I'm not. Hopefully that's not the case. But on the contrary, it's that we continue to look to please our wife in every aspect of the relationship. And the more we can wire ourselves into the fact that we are one and we're working as a team, so even when you take out the garbage, which by the way, that's my job, you don't feel diminished by taking out the garbage. You're taking out the garbage that both you ate from and your children, and it's almost a reward that you have the ability to take out the garbage. You know, I know everybody's going through something right now, okay? If you're living alone, there's challenges of that, and the anxiety of that, the boredom of that, etc. Maybe some of you can share more than I can, but I'm being rhetorical now. As most of you know, I'm blessed to be married and have, Baruch Hashem, 9 children with us, aging from 20 to 2.5. So I'll keep it real with you guys. We're talking about intimate subjects, so I'll be intimate with you, and I'll say there are times that it's challenging. You have everybody in the house. So it's different types of challenges. You got to bang out 36 meals a day. But if you realize that this is what your calling is, and this is what it's about, and ultimately these are the pleasures, and there are plenty that come with it, then it's a different attitude about taking out the garbage. You don't feel bad. You don't feel like routinized. So the point is that Judaism has to be a relationship. And King Solomon understood this. And not only did he understand it, but he uses the most quintessential, holiest spiritual experience in all of Judaism, the holiest city in the world, Jerusalem, the holiest place, the temple, in the holiest place, the Holy of Holies. In the Holy of Holies, we have the Ark. On top of the Ark, what do we have? We have 2 cherubs embracing each other, a male and female. Can you imagine? The deepest, most quintessential point in all of Judaism, what does it come to? A male and a female embracing each other. By the way, even if King Solomon didn't write that, that would still be there. King Solomon writes it to help us understand why. So let's try to understand why. Now we're holding text number 3. This is from Maimonides. What is it? I believe it's on page 36 on your student handbook. What is the proper degree of love? It is that one loves God with great, immense, abundant, very powerful love, to the point where his soul is bound with the love of God, such that he thinks of it constantly. He's enraptured by it. Just as when a man falls lovesick for a particular woman, he cannot remove her from his thoughts. With an even greater intensity should a person love God. As we were commanded in Deuteronomy, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and we know with all your might. What might is, we'll talk about maybe if we have time after the class. This concept was implied by King Solomon in Song of Songs. Maimonides, the codifier of the Jewish law, about 900 years ago, physician, mathematician, scientist, astronomer, astrologer. He quotes King Solomon in Song of Songs, and what did he say? When he stated, as a metaphor, I am lovesick. Indeed, the totality of the Song of Songs is a parable describing this love. You know, the month of Elul before high holidays, everybody, or not everybody, some people are familiar with this. There's an acronym, Ani Lidodi V'Dodi Li. That's what Elul is. I'm to my beloved and my beloved is to mine. We say that like floating out there, but everybody knows that's common. That's not even like deep Kabbalah or Zohar or Hasidism. Why? Because it's a relationship. We're trying to work to get to know Hashem. That's the month of Elul we prepare. And then from Elul on, after Rosh Hashanah comes, Lidodi Li, he embraces us in the sukkah, and we have this whole party. So here we have Maimonides. I say let's continue to the next text. By the way, it's also important to note that Maimonides, it's one thing you have a source from Kabbalah Zohar. Maimonides is halacha. Halacha is usually just more, the fact, the drier experience of Judaism. And even here, as a code of law, he's talking about being love-struck for God, like a man is love-struck for a woman. Okay. So we spoke about, let's go to text number 4. I'm going to read it in Hebrew. It's in your student book, I think page 37. It says, "Know, my children, that of all the holy matters, there is nothing as holy as the holiness of marital union. It is done with holiness, and one sanctifies oneself in it, as our sages of blessed memory have instructed us." Of all the holy matters, there's nothing as holy as a marital union. It's quite a statement. And so in what way is it considered the holiest? What makes it so holy? That's the real question. So we mentioned in the beginning of the arch of the class is what makes it so holy is a couple ideas, a couple things, but ultimately in this physical world, we're given the gift to express godliness, as I said before. When a woman lights Shabbos candles, she's expressing godliness. When we take on Shabbat, we're expressing godliness. When we're kind to each other, we're expressing God. Every aspect in your thought, your speech, and your action, all those three components, which are the garments, they are the extensions of your soul. You can either have good thoughts or bad thoughts, good speech or bad speech, good action or bad action. Okay, your soul can express itself in one of those three different categories. All those three categories have the ability to either express godliness or not. Now, the greatest form of expression of godliness, and this is what all the sources are leading up to right now, is intimate sexuality with your bashert. Because if it's not with your bashert, you're not elevating. And if you're not elevating, then it's not being done right. It's like eating an apple and not appreciating it, or appreciating it for a moment, but not what it could do for you later. It's not an elevating experience. Sexuality is a very powerful force, and either it's being used as an elevating experience or the opposite of an elevating experience, but it's not going to be neutral, nor is it meant to be neutral. In this physical world, when it says that we are in the image of God, we were created in the image of the God, what does that mean? That we have a soul inside of us, and we just as we have the ability to go ahead and express godliness where we can find it. Well, the greatest form of expression is really in an intimate relationship. Why? Because that is the ability and the potential to create. When God created the world, he created what's called yesh ma'ayin, something from nothing, ex nihilo. Since then, we really cannot create anything by ourselves. Usually everything we create is from something else. Even though they're cloning, let's say, donkeys somewhere, it's still coming from, a cell from something else. The closest opportunity we have in creating something from nothing is to have a child, to have children. Now, even if someone can't have children, or even if, let's say, a spouse is pregnant, or so it can't really happen, or menopause, or whatever it is, or you're past that stage, but the act is really reflective of this ability of creation. So it's really the most godlike experience, physical experience that we could have. So if we can express godliness in anything in this world, thought, speech, and action, how much more so in a relationship that's reflected by an embrace between a man and woman, reuniting, not uniting, but reuniting as they were before even they came down to this world. They were a perfect soul. So this realization ultimately gives us a better appreciation of that experience. Okay. Once again, we go to a little bit of, now we need to understand is the idea of holiness versus spirituality. So just a quick overview real quickly here. Someone can walk the top of a mountaintop and say they feel spiritual, okay? And see a sunset and they say it's a spiritual experience. I can appreciate that. I grew up in Venice Beach. I saw many sunsets, many ocean views, fantastic. keeping kosher when you're at the airport and there's no food and there's nothing but a potato chip vending machine, and even though you're doing it and you're eating it and it's kosher, doesn't feel so spiritual. So when we talk about the spiritual experience, we have to put it in context as it's not just what makes you spiritual, but we're thinking about a spirituality that's attached to it with it, extra dosage, so to speak, of holiness. And there's a difference between feeling spiritual and holiness. Holiness, I would say, is what we're trying to achieve, which is extracting godliness wherever he can be, she can be, wherever. That's holiness. Holiness is something that's beyond yourself. Feeling spiritual many times, not always, but many times can feel more about your own experience. So you could have a spiritual experience, but maybe the other person is not having a spiritual experience. You know, in Judaism, many times we say that, I feel that's almost the opposite of this idea, right? I feel close to God. You know, in my heart, I'm a Jew, but I don't express myself as a Jew. When it comes to sexuality, people maybe say they express themselves sexually, but they don't necessarily are wired in terms of the spiritual side to it. But for this particular purpose, when we're talking about people that feel closer to God, but not necessarily feel like they should express it, so we give the example of a mother who tells her child, since I got a lot of children at home, I'm going to give these examples, to go upstairs and clean your room. Right? Shivigo tells Menucha, go upstairs, make your bed, clean your room. It's been 3 days, you haven't made your bed. Time to make your bed. You know, we have a 3-day rule. No, I'm kidding. So she comes downstairs and she draws a beautiful picture of Shifra and gives it to her mother, right? So what does Shifra say? Say thank you, right? But she didn't really accomplish what mom wanted. It was very nice. She felt spiritual. She expressed herself, but she didn't act in the holiest manner because she didn't fulfill the request. She didn't bring the greater joy. The greater joy would have been if mom goes upstairs and see the bed is made and the room is clean. There's no question mom knows the child loves her. That's not the question at hand. The question is, are we going to share a moment that really is selfless of ourselves that brings out a greater holiness? So it's important to know a little bit between spiritual and holiness, what makes us feel good, what's self-gratification versus a more complete gratification. So text number 5, we have from the Babylonian Talmud. When the Jewish people came up to Jerusalem, hold on one second. When the Jewish people came up from Jerusalem for the holy festivals, the curtain separating the Holy of Holies from the temple courtyard was rolled aside, and the cherubim whose bodies were intertwined, I told you I'd give you the source, here it is, one with another, were shown to them. The assembled Jews were told, look, you are beloved before God, as love between a man and a woman. So this isn't just like, pop, Neo-Judaism. This is from the Talmud. It's over 2,000 years old. Judaism was never scared of this. And thank God. And ultimately, as I said before, this is the holiest place in the world, at the holiest time. Because what God craves more than anything else from us, and this is something that we need to think about in terms of, and we'll talk a little bit more details. I'm not going to get too graphic. You can go get your own books. But I want you to understand the concept of why. But ultimately, God wants us in a relationship. He doesn't want us to just do what he's asking us to do, that there has to be an experience. Because without it, we're lost. And therefore, many of the teachings and insight we Kabbalah, Hasidus bring these different values. And that's why also we're not scared of this idea of intimacy and sexuality. It is the greatest physical experience we were given, and attached to it is the greatest mitzvah in the world and the first mitzvah in the world. And if we are able to reunite with our own partner, both physically, it can be the greatest experience, and we'll talk about how to achieve that too. And of course, spiritually, we can accomplish the greatest things. But it has to be given the right amount of attention, the right amount of love, and the right amount of respect. Sadly, of course, present company excluded, we have not been doing that. Something as beautiful and as sacred as sexuality has not been given the attention, the love, and respect it deserved. Why? Because some people thought it was a good idea called the sexual revolution. It's nothing. It doesn't matter. It didn't mean anything. Those are the catchphrases that were attached to it to diminish the overall importance and desire. And somehow that would allow for a greater ability to experience it. And maybe it worked on certain degrees, but we also, a lot of things was lost through that process. And so we're trying to bring that back, that it should be the greatest moment, at least physically, between a husband and wife. And it should be something that everyone looks forward to. And it should be very, very special. And it should be dealt with tremendous attention and sensitivity and thought for the other. As I said, if we're trying to express godliness in something else, if that's the name of the game, so in the relationship, in a sexual relationship, it should also be the same way. If you're going into it, that relationship and the physical part of it and thinking about yourself only, then the opportunity is being missed in a very, very big way. Just as in godliness, we want to express godliness wherever we find it, so too in a relationship, in an intimate relationship as well. To see and connect to the godliness in your partner. You know, in Judaism, or in the Torah, I should say right away, we have, I'm going to mute all because I'm going to ask a question. And something tells me, one second, unmute all. If you have noise in the background, shut it off, or you can mute yourself. Oh, I think I can mute. So I'm going to pick on Marika because she's my favorite student rabbi to pick on. So how does the Torah refer at the very, very beginning to sexuality? Hold on. I got you. Hold on a second. Hold on a second, you all. I'm going to figure this out. Here we go. Hold on. I got. Boom. Okay. Marika, you're on. How does the Torah refer to
well, if it's Perik Aleph, it's just to be fruitful and multiply, but the big one's that he knew his wife, that Adam knew Chava.
Right. That's what I was looking for. So Adam yada es Chava. The Adam knew Chava. And we know when he says he knows him, we're talking about a knowledge that they both gain about each other that's not in books. That's beyond even the dating process. That happens in a very, very special, intimate moment between them two alone. That's to really know someone at that level. That's what we call elevation, is that you have a deeper appreciation of the person because you reach that level of knowledge. So that's something that, you know, specifically from the very, very beginning, the Torah refers to. Okay? Let's go to 6. Text number 6. Marika, you do the Hebrew, I'll do the English.
Okay.
You're okay with me picking on you?
Yeah, you can pick on me. Only you, though, nobody else.
Okay. Go ahead.
ונודעתי לך שם ודיברתי איתך מעל הכופרת מבין שני הקרובים אשר על ארון העדות את כל אשר אצווה אותך אל בני ישראל.
Right. It says, I will arrange my meetings with you there from on top of the ark's cover, from between the two kruvim that are upon the ark testimony. I will tell you all that I will instruct you to rely to the children of Israel. In other words, it's known that in the temple, both first and second, what do we have? We had where God communicated through the keruvim everything that he wanted. In other words, not only was this idea of symbolic, picture that should be replicated in Spielberg's movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, or maybe in a museum somewhere. No, it was real time. The God's infinite speech and what the instruction came through the keruvim. This you can look up through this very, very place of where man and woman become one. Now, you can ask a rhetorical question, which I'm going to ask for you for the sake of the Zoom class. It's easier if I do it this way. That ultimately, the reason why God uses this experience is to really, really prove that that's the greatest form of knowledge. But the question is, if that's the case, so how come every shul doesn't have that? So for here, you have to understand this answer. It's very important because you can get lost on the first part. Only in the Holy of Holies, which was a spiritual Debet HaMikdash, was the possibility of complete selflessness and sanctity going to express itself. In other words, if we try to go ahead and get crazy and bring that sort of experience in every shul or kiddush club or whatnot, we're not that holy. It would go weird real fast. In the holy temple, on Yom Kippur, or by the high priest, So yes, God can reveal himself in this manner. We know it's going to be treated in the holiest possible way. So it's something that we should try to aspire to and achieve to have in our consciousness, especially in that part of our life. But it's not something that necessarily we cannot replicate the Holy of Holies. God willing, we'll merit the third and final Beit HaMikdash. We'll have that experience again. But just to head off some of what would be the other questions. Okay. Let's read text number 7. Marika, you still there? You good?
I'm here. Can we read the Hebrew or the English?
Read the Hebrew.
Okay.
Unless you want to read the English. You go right to the English. Why not? Go to the English.
Okay. It is written in Job, he is in one. In one, should it not read, he is one? From this we learn that God only abides and dwells in one, in the person who achieves a holy oneness nowhere else. When is a person called one? During the union of intimacy. When a man and woman unite, they become one. They are one in body and one in soul. They are one person, and God dwells in the oneness.
Okay. It's interesting that in Judaism, not only do we allow intimacy, but it's mandated. You know, one of the 3 provisions that is obligation on the husband to the wife before he marries her in the ketubah, in the contract, and it's stated there, 2,000-year-old ketubah. By the way, it's the oldest document that we have, period, that we know of, in terms of, between mankind, is the ketubah. I've done a lot of them. Other than switching the names and the dates and the specificness of it, the ketubah remains a brick, so to speak, PDF, right? And in that PDF, you have to provide shelter, food, and onah. We'll get to that verse also, which means sexuality. So not only is it allowed, but it's mandated. I want to share a story. I know I'm moving a little bit around over here, but it's too good not to give it to you. There was a story of a particular Tana. This comes from the Talmud Brachot, something that I was able to jot down, between Rav Kahana, between two great rabbis, Rav Kahana and his teacher Rav. Listen to the story. Rav is going to his bedroom to be with his wife. His student, Rav Kahana, decides to go under the bed. I guess he's a curious student, and he wants to know how his teacher conducts himself. And he hears, and you can look this up on the Safaria, this is not the... He hears how his teacher is saying all the romantic things and all the nice things and really, making his wife feel great and, setting it up so that it should be a special moment. And he's shocked. He's very surprised. And he can't contain himself. So immediately, he jumps out from under the bed and he blurts out, the mouth of Rav, I want to quote it, is like the mouth of a hungry man who has never eaten a cooked meal before. Can you imagine the chutzpah? The son jumps out from under his Rebbe's bed and says such a thing to his Rebbe, like someone. So Rav asked Kahana, is that you? I guess he knew his customers. So he says, and he continues, he goes, it's not good manners to hide under your teacher's bed. That's all he tells him. And Rav Kahana answered, this is Torah, and I must learn it. The student recognized that this is Torah, and I must learn it. For more in depth, you have to look up the Gemara over there. But the point is, the Rebbe didn't apologize. He didn't say, I'm having an off night, leave me alone, and I was desperate. No. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. The fact that you are a nosy student is your problem you need to work on. That's not okay. But the fact that a husband and wife are allowed to be intimate and close to each other and be one, as we just learned from the Zohar, that's really the goal. Okay? So I want to go to text number 8. And then we may blow it up for some conversation. Text number 8.
Do you want me to keep reading?
Sure. You're doing good.
Okay. Man and women are individual parts of one person, and together they form a complete entity. When they are complete, the Shekhinah rests upon them. For the degree of God's presence in a person's life correlates to his or her completion. As such, when man and women unite and attain wholesomeness, the name of God rests upon them.
Right. So ultimately, as I mentioned before, it's B'Tselem Elokim. An interesting idea. I'm going to parlay this to the next idea is when we talk about perfection and godlike experience, and when does God rest upon them? If you ever notice by a wedding, there's Sheva brachot that happen by the chuppah. Then again by the benching, 7 days. And it says Yotzer Adam. Asher Yotzer as Adam b'tavnis b'bus tavnisay. Listen, Yotzer Adam. In other words, that we fashion man in God's image. We say it by the chuppah. So the question is, why do we say it by the chuppah? You should say when a child is born. Chuppah's already could be 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever it is. Because this idea of in God's image is at its heightened point when man and woman find each other. It's not to say that we don't have meaningful existence with it. People have not been married, people have been married and divorced. We understand all the dynamics and the possibilities out there. But the highest optimal point, and why we say that bracha, the blessing of B'Tselem Elokim, is by a chuppah, not when they're born, is because that's when the potential, the heightened potential really kicks in for that experience. So that's something that I wanted to make sure that we covered as well. I want to go push it to text number 9, which is page 40 on your student sheets. I'll read this because I think, and I'm going to preface it with a question. And the question that I'll put out there, which is rhetorical, is how do we reach this level? You know, I'm in the young adult space for a long time. I understand that you're thinking like rabbis on a trip. Come on. No. How do we reach this level? And I believe that everybody here, not here, but everybody in all of Judaism can reach this level. You can reach this level when you want to reach it all, when you have it all, when you want to have it all in life, you have to put it all. We put so much effort in so much of our experience in life, but how much effort do we really put into this particular level of connection and unification? If you really want to have that experience, if you really want to have the godlike B'Tselem Elokim experience, and really have your soulmate and bashert, and really have the full meaning of your soulmate bashert, both in terms of physical as well as spiritual, emotional partner in life, then you have to put all of it into it. What is putting all of it into it? So this is a little bit of a teaser for our next class. In Judaism, we have something very, very unique. And the uniqueness of Judaism, especially when we talk about marriage, is the concept of mikvah, of spiritual immersion. And usually this really means that we do not have relationships with our wife anywhere between 12 to 14 days a month. Most normal cases going through a menstrual cycle, and because of that, we give her space, we give her time, and the opportunity to have a regrowth, an idea of birth and recreation, as we spoke already about the class, takes place at the highest level after the mikvah. And I know that a lot of people think, oh my God, that's restricting. But just for fun, I want to share with you that my father, Allah Hashem, was good friends with Dr. Ruth Westheimer, a Holocaust survivor and a sexologist. I believe she's still alive. She must be 150 by now, but she talks sex like a 21-year-old, and she's a radio show, and she's just a fascinating character. I hope she's still alive. I heard it 30 years ago, but that's Dr. Ruth Westheimer. She told my father, and she's an atheist, by the way. You can't blame her. Anyone who survived the Holocaust can say whatever they want, be whatever they want, but she's a tremendous, tremendous personality. And she said that the one thing she knows the rabbis got right was mikvah. She says that the fact that there's a certain level of physical separation, just so you know, if you paid attention to the first class, is not distancing. That's like the year of marriage, of engagement, where you're committed to each other, but you can't physically be with each other. So when you don't have physical engagement, it's the opportunity to actually have conversation beyond what would follow otherwise, in a different setting. So maybe the conversation isn't sweet talking, romantic to head in that direction, but it's a little bit more insightful to the other person. So you have 2 weeks of insightful conversation that has nothing to do with sexuality. It's not going to lead there. You can only imagine that after the experience of that 2-week separation and you get back together again, it's like a wedding night. So religious people, and I'll try to summarize this and then we can open up for questions. Religious people that do this the right way, that get this the right way, in a healthy way, in respectful boundaries, and a meaningful experience. They get the, added value of every single month. It's like wedding night. That means after wedding night, it's like honeymoon. If you really, really put the time and the effort and allow some of the restrictions that are in place in order to achieve this optimal experience of both physical and spiritual at the very same time, becoming godlike at the very same time, then they're happy. It's not just that they have a lot of kids. They're very, very happy. Not to be misconfused with a Netflix series that said that they're not so happy. And we can get to that too if you want. So it does require some discipline. It does require some restriction. In my life, I meet, lucky to meet all different kinds of people and all different facets. And it is interesting to me that sometimes when I meet extremely, extremely successful people in finance, specifically in finance, I found that their discipline is off the charts. They're getting up 5 o'clock in the morning. They run marathons. They're in a certain gear of go, 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 go. Tremendous amount of discipline in them. That's not to say that not everyone who's disciplined achieves it, and everybody who's not disciplined doesn't achieve it, but I have seen that as a whole. And certainly I've seen that in Judaism and spirituality. The people that I choose to be close to, both in friends and leadership and mentorship, that you can see there's a certain spiritual glow. They're plugged into godliness on another level. They're working hard on it. They didn't just push a button. They're up late at night davening. They're reading. They're learning. They're intaking a certain level of discipline in their life. Not everything they want, they have. I'll share with you just an idea, an iota. I had a Rosh Hashiva. Sadly, he passed away because of COVID-19. He was in New York. The Chabad community was hit very, very hard, as some of you may know. And a lot of people I knew, very, very revered people that revered my father's generation. They were elderly. Many of them were elderly. They could live 2 more years, 10 years. Who cares? They passed away, and that's sad. They passed away now. And one of the stories that were said about him, there's so many for another time, but one little one that's appropriate for now is he asked one of his students to go get him coffee. And so the students said, "Would you like sugar in the coffee?" And he grimaced. He grimaced. The idea that you would add sugar, like some sort of ancillaries. I know that none of us can relate to this, including myself, but based on our conversation, hopefully you can see where this guy was. He was like from another generation. In other words, what he needed was coffee to stay up so he could learn more. Sugar, that would already be a personal self-indulgent. That's not part of his game plan. There's no room for that. When we see the guy who's a triathlon, I met someone he's an Ironman. If I offered him sugar, he'd probably say the same thing. No sugar for me. It's weight. I'm going to go over my calorie count. That we all get. And that's still impressive. I'm not diminishing that. It's huge, enormous. But I'm just going to show you that you can also have a certain discipline in a spiritual fashion also. And there also are rewards and payouts and returns in all kinds of levels. And not just all kinds of levels in terms of between you and God to get a payback after 120 years, but in the here and the now. Every time we have the ability to expose godliness wherever we have the ability to do that. Remember, in thought, speech, and action, we're winning. We're connecting. We're living our lives at a higher level. How much more so when it comes to our partner in life, to find the godliness in them, to respect them with the godliness that's inside of them, and to experience all the joys that God encourages us to have. I'll just, one more anecdote, since this is a topic that I don't talk about too often, so I figured I might as well give it all to you right now. We know that it says that on Friday night, it's an extra added mitzvah to have a relationship with your wife on Friday night. So most commentators say, why? Because Shabbos, you're supposed to have oneg. You're supposed to have a certain level of joy. You're supposed to sleep a little bit more, eat a little better meals. It's part of the Shabbos experience to have more oneg. But the Hasidic Master says, no. it's not the oneg of the physical experience, which of course is there too, but to achieve the spiritual experience that Shabbos has and the spiritual experience that relationships have on Shabbos. That's to go to a whole nother level. So, there is more, but I want to conclude it over here. And I think we got most of the package that at this point for you to unravel and appreciate and to summarize. Sexuality is not a bad thing. Not in Judaism. It's actually a good thing. It's actually a great thing. And one could argue it's the greatest thing. Because guess what, everybody? If it wasn't for sexuality, nobody would be on the Zoom call. So if it's done right, and it's done meaningful, and it's done special, and it's done in the right parameters, then it really can be the experience. And that's why over and over again, we always have this appreciation and analogy between a husband and wife experience when we talk about God and the Jewish people and that relationship. And of course, yes, because just as God and the Jewish people, sometimes there's tension and there's misunderstandings, and we need to work it through, and we need to talk it out. All that's true, but it's worth it if you want to achieve both the experience of Bashert and being closer to your Bashert to the point, and I'll conclude this with this, is to the point of closeness and oneness before you were divided and came into this world. The powerful surge and inner surge that we have for sexuality is to be united again. So I'll conclude with a blessing. Let us use that to try to find and unite our Bashert, and that we should experience the highest optimal level of relationship, God willing, with your Bashert. So l'chaim, l'chaim. I'll leave it here for now.